Next, I'd like to go over water and wastewater. The two are interwoven in our society. We don't really think, for the most part, when we go and turn on the faucet in the kitchen or the bathroom or turn on the shower, we don't think about where that water comes from. We just turn it on and assume water's going to come out. Same with the toilet. When we use the toilet and we flush it, we just assume when we push that lever down or push that button that it's just going to go somewhere and we're not going to have to deal with it. And when those two get interrupted, it causes a huge disruption in society. Imagine if on the short term you can't take showers, it's an inconvenience. If you can't use water out of your faucet to cook, then that becomes an inconvenience and you need to go to the store for water. So does a lot of other people that need to go and get water from the store also, which makes the store supply go down. Another area that can be vulnerable during a cyber attack on the water and wastewater side is all the infrastructure that goes under your feet. There are massive pipelines everywhere, and a lot of those in growing cities are computerized. And they have valves and pump stations and water towers and reservoirs and all that stuff. And if that system is breached on a cyber side, then valves can get closed, water can get shut off. And while most all of those have a manual relay that they can go out and actually physically move the valve and disconnect the computer, in large areas, you're talking about thousands of valves. And that could take hours or days to work out which ones are opened and closed if the computer goes down. Another area of vulnerability is telecommunications. And when I say telecommunications, that covers everything from Facebook and Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, internet service providers, satellite television, cable television, to some degree over-the-air antennas. When there's a major disaster and social media goes down, the majority of people in my generation, and younger and some older, get their news from their Facebook feed, Twitter feed, Snapchat, or Instagram. And when those feeds go down, there's a vacuum of data that people don't know what's happening. And if you were in a situation where news was not being sent over cable or satellite television, or even over-the-air antennas to that point yet, and you couldn't get on those social media sites, people could begin to panic because they're not getting information. One example that I'd like to use for a telecommunications hacking, and what happened is a hacking, but the way information was disseminated is what I'd like to focus more on specifically. In April 2017, in Dallas, there was a hacking of the tornado siren system. And they went off 15 times, 90 seconds each, from 11:40 p.m. until 1:20 a.m. And when that started to happen, at first, the first thing I did was get up out of bed, go outside and see what was going on, just to make sure the weather was bad, because it wasn't supposed to be bad that evening. And it wasn't, the skies were clear. The next thing I did was went on the Weather Channel app, and I pulled the Weather Channel app and the radar was clear. At that point, I was wondering what was going on. And that was the same time when all the news about North Korea launching a missile was just getting a lot of hype in the news. At that point, I wasn't super concerned that was the issue, but it was definitely on the back of my Rolodex of concerns starting to kind of go through. And by the second time that the siren started to go off, I was getting a little curious what was going on. So I turned on the news. I turned on Fox, NBC, and CBS, and there was nothing. I then decided to go online. I went to Facebook just to see if there was anything in the news feed in the recent posts. Then I went to Twitter to see what was on there, and I did. I saw a few people on Facebook that asking what was going on in the Dallas area, because people were waking up late in the middle of the night wondering why all the sirens were going off and the sky was clear. And I went to the news sources for CBS and Fox, NBC, the same thing, and I still wasn't seeing anything. At that point, I was getting interested. I was getting curious why there wasn't any news from major news outlets. And by this point, it was probably the third or fourth time the sirens were continuously going off. And if there was an emergency, it was clearly very important. So I went to my next kind of level in gathering intelligence is to go to Broadcastify, and you can pull up scanner feeds from all over the world and see what's going on. And part of that for me, for us, for Nikki and I, is to pull up everything in Dallas, police, fire, and utility, and then to go all the way around us in a circle. So everywhere that is encompassing Dallas, to pull up their fire and EMS, and then start listening. And what started to get me a little worried was I pulled up 2 or 3 different frequencies, I don't want to say who, and the officers were calling to dispatch, asking what was going on with the tornado sirens, and there was no answer. So at that point I began to get a little nervous because there's nothing on over-the-air antenna. The only thing on Facebook is people from all over North Texas asking what's going on with no real answer, just people speculating. Nothing on Twitter at that point. And now I'm listening to, the kind of the heartbeat of the city, law enforcement and fire, and they're calling into dispatch with no answer either. And I knew, at least at this point, the radar was clear, the sky was clear, so I began thinking either A, there was some inbound threat, and that was a very big concern, or B, there was some type of hacking. And since I had not received any alert on my phone, on iPhones or Androids when it pops up with the warning on it, nothing showed up, at least to that point. So I didn't think there was an inbound threat, but I did think that there was something probably on a hacking side. So I wasn't super nervous yet, but I was starting to get in place I have a protocol for if there's a cyber attack and then to what degree of it. Part of that protocol is to make sure all of our batteries are charged, laptops, iPads, our Goal Zero batteries, radios, that kind of stuff, our scanner that we have, our Uniden scanner, and make sure all those are charged up. And the next step is to make sure all of our other basic emergency stuff is kind of in place, to make sure that the cars are fueled up, make sure that we have our security plan in place, make sure that the appropriate clothing for the weather that's outside and for probably the next couple of weeks is laid out and ready to go if it's at nighttime, which it was. And then by that point, I felt pretty secure in that. I still hadn't heard anything from anyone around. All I heard was questions going unanswered, what was going on, and still nothing on Twitter. CBS 11 started to have posts come up saying they heard the sirens. They had a video clip of it. They said, we don't know what's going on, but we're looking into it. And that at least felt good because at least some credible news source was working on it locally. And so I decided to call the non-emergency number for 911 where we live. And as soon as the dispatcher picked up the phone, I made sure to say, this is not an emergency. I'm just wondering. And she filled in the sentence saying, we don't know what's going on with tornado sirens. And there is not an immediate threat that she knows of at this time. And I could tell that she was busy because she obviously had that rehearsed quickly. And the phone was ringing off the hook in the background. And so at that point, I assumed it was cyber in some way. Nothing was giving an indicator of something else going wrong. The entire time those went off until about 2 a.m., which I think it was about 1:20 when they stopped. The only thing that was really coming up was Facebook posts. And my point of bringing this up in the telecommunications section is there was nothing on the traditional TV. And I had it on. And there was no breaking news. The only way that information was coming out, and it was coming out, but the only way it was coming out was over Facebook and Twitter. Because by that point, all 3 major news agencies in the area started posting stuff. They said that there was, something possibly going on. They're still working on it, but there's no immediate emergency. To not call 911 because they were obviously swamped, just like I did. But the only way people were getting information was by going onto social media. So social media, in addition to something similar to that, is taken down. Then a lot of people, when they don't have information, get scared. And I have to admit, by the time I woke Nikki up, we weren't scared, but we were definitely on edge trying to make sure we had stuff in order because something wasn't right. And there are some people that get fearful much quicker. And there's a quote from The Guardian, it's a British newspaper, and the quote is, "Lack of information can turn a passive crowd into a stampede." And while that did not happen, because there was information, if the event was worse, say there was some type of attack like 9/11, and all of a sudden news went down and Facebook and Twitter went down, and all of a sudden there's a vacuum of information, people are going to get scared. And scared people can do some very drastic things. On the day after Thanksgiving, when all the sales are open, people turn into crazy animals for a television or whatever the new hot new thing is. Just imagine if they were scared and they were doing those same things. You would go from people that were terrified to charging stores and acting even worse than they were on the day after Thanksgiving for sales. Because they're wanting to get food and water and they don't know what's going on and they just want to protect their babies. That's a very scary thing to be in the midst of. The next thing I want to go over is cellular networks. And while there is a very low chance of cellular networks going down, they are built with huge resiliency in every possible aspect you can imagine. They are still a technology, and technology can fail. And that's why I just wanted to bring up, it's always good to have two forms of communication. It's always good to have some form of two-way radio, a direct line communication, especially if you have the ability to go through a repeater, either amateur radio or GMRS. It's also, I think, important to have something like GoTenna that can relay, so you're not just going point to point. And you can text and send your GPS location for smaller areas. Or just the traditional GoTenna, which is a device that pairs up, that lets you send messages. It's more of a point to point, it's not mesh like the other unit.